It's
copyright.
It looks like
Copyright.
but due to
Fair use.
it's not. Still, we should run like it is.
Copyright.
Though it isn't.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Hell. My name is Nick, and I've never seen a Godzilla movie before. Let's change that. Even if you're like me and haven't seen any of the movies, you've at least heard of Godzilla before. I've always been fascinated by the mystique of the franchise. It may not have been the first movie to feature a giant monster, but it certainly is one of the most popular. I've always wanted to go through these movies and familiarize myself with them, but for whatever reason, I've just never gotten around to doing so. But now that I've got a week ahead of me with nothing planned, my life is very interesting, I thought, hey, why don't I go ahead and watch every Godzilla movie and maybe even turn that into a video? Which seemed like a good idea in concept, until I realized there's currently 38 movies in the franchise. That sounds like hell. However, all of these movies are separated by different eras in Japanese history, with the first era containing 15 movies. Which, yeah, is still a lot, but I figured it could make for an interesting challenge. So, over the next 5 days, I will be watching all 15 Shōwa era Godzilla movies and giving my immediate thoughts on each of them after I finish them. I'll watch 3 per day, rank them as I go from worst to best, and give a final ranking once I'm finished with every movie. But before I start, keep in mind I'm covering 15 different movies in this video, so my thoughts on each of them are going to be pretty quick and straight to the point. And also, Toho Limited, the producers of this franchise, are very well known for not knowing what fair use is, so there's going to be very little to no use of clips for each movie. I don't like it either, but I'd rather not get a copyright strike for an 8-second clip. And finally, spoilers ahead! Even though I won't be going super in depth, I will be talking about the story of each film and how they all end. So, since I have 15 movies to get through, let's move to day 1 and start with our first movie, the original Godzilla.
Tomorrow.
I just finished watching the first Godzilla movie, and before I get more into things, I want to make something a little more clear. Like I said, this movie just turned 70 years old. My grandparents were in high school when this movie came out. So you've got to give some liberties when reviewing films this old, because it wouldn't be fair to compare this to an Oppenheimer or even a food fight. But even with all that being said, I actually enjoyed this movie quite a bit. It's actually quite remarkable for its age, and despite how some of the special effects didn't pan out well, they're pretty easy to forgive. This movie was also made as a protest against nuclear weapons, with them being a focal point of the story. Due to bomb tests in the water, Godzilla, a creature from the Jurassic era, has emerged and begins to sporadically appear on the surface. It destroys several towns and decimates Tokyo, before Doctor uses the oxygen destroyer to kill Godzilla, and in part, take his own life. It's a very well told story with some genuinely heartbreaking moments. The scenes with Godzilla are definitely the best here, but some of the scenes without him do tend to drag a little. I will say the scenes featuring dynamics between the main characters were all very well done. I also like how the tease sequels at the end, saying that if more bombs are tested, more monsters will appear. I gotta say though, my biggest complaint with this movie had to be Godzilla's eyes. What were they thinking? Other than that, I really enjoyed my time with this movie. I may not have loved every minute, but I absolutely see why it had the impact that it did. Obviously top of the list so far, but let's see how the rest of these movies compare. Raids Again continues the story of the original film, but not as strong as the first. It brings brand new settings and a cast of new characters, with Dr. Inabe being the only character brought back from the original. Between the two movies, another H-bomb was tested. Are they stupid? Causing not only the return of Godzilla, but also Anguirus, another kaiju monster. The climax here is definitely the fight they have in Osaka, but I just have to say, why are they moving so fast? Like in the first film, Godzilla was slow and intimidating. Here, what is that? Godzilla ends up killing Anguirus, and later appears on a remote island. They end up burying him with avalanches, putting him at bay for the time being. One of the most surprising things about this film for me had to be the character development. I was disappointed at first with how little we knew about each character, but after the first battle, I felt like everyone started to bloom. Especially Kobayashi, because at first, he just seemed like someone who was desperate for a girlfriend. He later does find someone and tries to figure out how to please her, but unfortunately he does die while fighting Godzilla, but causes the first avalanche to help defeat him. This movie certainly isn't perfect either though. The first half did drag quite a bit, plus the movements between the two monsters. But overall, I did enjoy this movie quite a bit. It started off pretty rough, but it really grew on me toward the end. I definitely still prefer the original film, but it's nowhere near bad. First off, there are 2 pretty distinct versions of this film. One for American markets, and another for Japanese markets. And I chose to watch the Japanese version, as it's the original, plus every other movie is of Japanese origin. Secondly, this is the only movie that I'm covering in this video that isn't officially available on YouTube, so I don't know what's up with that. And finally, this is the first Godzilla movie in color, and I don't know how to feel about it. The first 2 movies felt really ominous with their darker settings, whereas here, it doesn't quite feel that way. As for the story, Godzilla is reawakened from the last film, and King Kong has been kidnapped by an advertising company. The two eventually have a great fight on Mount Fuji, ending with both monsters falling into the ocean and heading back to their homes. I know I glanced over the story here, but almost nothing about it grabbed my attention in any way. There's not a ton of character development here, and the only character I found notable was the advertising guy, because he's the worst character in any of these movies so far. But I do have to say, the fight at the end was pretty good, all things considered. It thankfully wasn't as fast-paced as the previous movies, and other than a few moments that kick, it was pretty fun to watch. This movie ends on a really high note, but as for everything else, you can take it or leave it. It just felt like this entire movie was made just for the fight scene, which is the only thing I'd recommend watching from this movie. It's certainly not bad, but it's going at the bottom of the list for now. Alright, day 1 is in the books, and I need a shower. I'll see you all tomorrow.
Day 2.
I'm happy to say that we're starting off day 2 on a very good note. Mothra vs. Godzilla is up next, and even though I haven't seen the original Mothra film, I still really enjoyed this movie. A Mothra egg appears on shore, and a business mogul buys the egg to turn it into an attraction. Then 2 tiny women show up, the business refuses to give back the egg, and they fly back with the original Mothra to their island. Never thought I'd say a sentence like that. Then Godzilla reemerges, and once the main characters go to Mothra's island to ask for help, it agrees to help defeat Godzilla. Mothra and Godzilla then have a pretty good battle, but Mothra ultimately dies during the battle. The egg eventually hatches with twins, who spin Godzilla into a web and plunge him into the ocean. And I've gotta say, for as out there as a lot of this film was, it had a lot more story beats compared to the last film. Even during the scenes where characters just talk to each other, I never felt bored and everything felt necessary to the plot. Also, having one of the monsters portrayed as the hero was a nice change of pace as well. So yeah, I think Mothra vs. Godzilla is one of the best films so far, and if I'm being honest, it's probably my favorite so far. I don't know if that's a hot take or not. So yeah, top of the list. Let's keep going. This movie definitely has the wildest plot yet. And yes, more than the last film. Godzilla and a flying monster called Rodan reemerge, and while this is happening, a 3-headed monster called Ghidorah comes to Earth from Venus. A foreign princess then gets possessed by a Venusian, and while being hunted down by terrorists, she tries to warn everyone of the impending doom. They then call for the new Mothra. Oh yeah, one of the twins died, by the way. Who convinces both Godzilla and Rodan to team up against Ghidorah. So yeah, pretty busy sounding movie, and thankfully it fills the time pretty well. All of these story plots flow together surprisingly well, and each of the characters felt fleshed out. Not to mention seeing 3 monsters team up against Ghidorah was pretty cool to see as well. That being said, like Raids Again, this one didn't really grab me until the second half. Nothing was boring to sit through, but most of the first half of this movie just felt like you were waiting for something to happen. But in defense, I think this film succeeded a lot more than Raids Again did. And for as absurd as a lot of the story is, they play it fairly straight and it works pretty well. Ghidorah tops Raids Again and is number 3 overall. Let's continue with the final movie of the day. Out of every movie up to this point, I was honestly expecting the least out of this film. But it surprised me quite a bit. This is definitely the least monster-centric movie so far, as it feels more like an alien invasion story that just involves the monsters. But honestly, it works very well. The story follows the discovery of Planet X, meeting the aliens who live there, and how they're trying to get rid of Ghidorah, who's moved on to their planet. They trade both Godzilla and Rodan for a cure of all diseases, which is, of course, a trap. They then try to take over Earth with all 3 monsters, but once the main characters learn that harsh noise is the aliens' kryptonite, they play harsh noise throughout the world, destroying every alien ship. There's a lot more emphasis placed on the human characters compared to the monsters here, and I honestly welcome that change. Most of my complaints about these movies so far has been the lack of character development, and I think it solved it pretty well. Also, fun fact, for the 2 main characters, Fuji spoke in Japanese, and Glenn, an American actor, actually spoke in English, and both characters were dubbed over in their own versions, which I found pretty interesting. I definitely understand why some people don't enjoy this film, as you don't really expect this kind of movie when you expect a kaiju film. But I honestly enjoyed this movie quite a bit, and I don't really have any huge complaints. Except Godzilla dancing, though. That was kind of weird. Honestly, I'm putting this over Ghidorah. It's certainly not the best kaiju film, but it is one of my favorites so far. Alright, day 2 is in the books, and I'm still feeling pretty positive. I'll see you all tomorrow.
Day 3.
Well, there goes my optimism. Ebirah is the first Godzilla movie since Raids Again to feature a different director, and it definitely shows. A lot of the scenes feel a lot more fast-paced, and the characters feel lot dumber. 4 of the main characters commit crimes within the first 10 minutes. Anyways, our characters are searching for a brother lost at sea and get attacked by Ebirah, a giant lobster thing. They all wash up on a terrorist-controlled atomic bomb plant, which just so happens to feature a sleeping Godzilla. They also befriend a slave from Mothra's island, who has also become a full moth at this point, and wake up Godzilla, who destroys the plant, Ebirah, and decides to fight Mothra just because. The island then explodes, but everyone makes it off in time. The story was certainly intriguing in concept, but the execution was far from perfect. None of the characters had any real personality. One knew how to pick locks, and that's about it. Ebirah's design didn't feel creative either. It just looked like they took a lobster and stuck red eyes onto it. And also, it feels like Godzilla's eyes have gotten bigger with every single movie, and the bigger they get, the less intimidating he looks, if I'm being honest. Anyways, I wouldn't call this movie bad by any means, but there's just nothing to write home about. It's going at the bottom of the list for now, but I doubt it'll stay there for the rest of the video. I swear to God, every time I turn on this camera, I feel like my optimism dies a little more. Son of Godzilla is easily my least favorite movie so far for a myriad of reasons. Firstly, Godzilla's eyes got bigger. And while I'm on character design, all of the new monsters feel just as unimaginative as Ebirah. Giant mantis, giant spider, and don't even get me started on Godzilla's son. It really reminds me of It-Star from Terrahawks. They try to combine cute and terrifying and only made him terrifyingly ugly. As for the main story behind this movie, it's fine. A journalist lands on an island where scientists are trying to control the weather, and after the experiment fails, they have to hide from all the giant bugs they've created, and attempt the experiment again to freeze them all. The characters here were a bit more memorable than past movies, especially Goro and Reiko's relationship and how stir-crazy Furukawa got. This movie felt like every TV show that tried to add a new character to boost ratings, only for it to fall flat on their face. And in general, this was just not a satisfying watch. Bottom of the list again, but let's see if Destroy All Monsters can top it. Even though I did praise Astro-Monster for how much focus was being put on the characters instead of the monsters, I do think it is getting a little out of hand now. This movie brings back every monster from the Godzilla franchise except for King Kong and Ebirah, and even brings in some monsters that haven't appeared in Godzilla movies before. And for as many monsters as there are in this movie, it feels like they're all playing second banana. An alien race called the Keylocks have invaded Earth and have taken control of all the monsters and even some humans. A space agency finds a base on the moon, and once they destroy it, they regain the control of the monsters and destroy the base on Earth as well. So yeah, instead of the monsters being the main threat in this movie, they're all just being used by the protagonist and antagonists. It also feels like this franchise has moved away from threatening against these monsters to glamorizing them. I'm not saying it's wrong for the franchise to pivot, but to go from saying these monsters are the worst possible thing to happen to outright making them heroes, it's weird. I don't know. All that aside though, this movie is fine for the most part. It was interesting to see all these monsters in one place, but the story just felt like a rehash of Astro-Monster. It's going right below Raids again, and I'm hoping things will pick up tomorrow. I'll see you then.
Day 4.
This movie is the shortest of the films I'm watching this video, and it's also the lowest rated. I concur. This movie is basically a season finale clip show, as it reuses fight scenes from previous films while throwing together a story that loosely ties everything together. It follows a kid named Ichiro who gets kidnapped by bank robbers and has to fight for himself to escape them. And where do Godzilla and other monsters come into play here? His mind. When dreaming, he imagines himself with baby Godzilla, who's now named Manila, apparently, as they watch Godzilla fight other monsters, aka fights that were recycled from previous films. There is a new monster that Manila ends up fighting, but that's about it. There really isn't much to say here, it's just a nothing burger of a movie with nothing to add. To the surprise of no one, bottom of the list. Let's keep moving. Alright, we finally have a decent bounce back. This movie has a big anti-pollution message, which was nice to see considering what the original movies were trying to warn against. A monster named Hedorah has appeared due to ocean pollution, and as the pollution gets worse, the bigger and more powerful it gets. It goes from a bullet bill to a frog to a drone. Weird evolution, but I won't judge. And even when the monster is broken down, each piece can rejoin and regain its original size. Scientists learned that Hedorah is weak to electricity, so they and Godzilla team up to shock and kill it. This is also the darkest movie I've seen so far, as you literally see people die from Hedorah, including the main character's uncle. The characters here are also pretty refined, especially Ken with his smarts and his connection with Godzilla. I definitely wouldn't call this movie perfect though, as a lot of the fight scenes feature a lot of standing around and taunting. But overall, I enjoyed this movie much more than the past couple. It's certainly not a top tier Godzilla movie, but it's definitely one of the more interesting ones, especially at this point in the franchise. I'll put it just below Ghidorah. It's an enjoyable time, and I hope things continue this way. For the final movie of day 4, we have another pretty middle-of-the-road movie. We follow a manga artist as he gets a job at a park called Children's Land, where the people running the park are actually a group of giant space cockroaches. Go figure. They're trying to kill Godzilla and other monsters so they can colonize Earth for themselves. They bring in Ghidorah and Gigan, a cyborg monster, to help kill Godzilla and Anguirus. The main characters destroy the cockroach's tower, allowing the heroes to get the upper hand and destroy the space monsters. The story itself didn't really intrigue me in any way, as it felt like another rehash of Astro-Monster's story. But there were two things in particular that really bugged me about this film. Firstly, they literally used dolls to represent humans in one scene. That annoyed me a lot more than it should have. And secondly, it reuses a lot of scenes from previous Ghidorah films, especially when he and Anguirus are fighting. I get that a lot of these scenes were hard to create, but to literally reuse them instead of creating something new just feels extremely lazy to me. Overall, though, it's not a terrible movie, but I wouldn't call it good either. It's going right above Ebirah in the rankings for me. Okay, well, the past 2 days have been pretty disappointing, but we only have one more day left, so let's see how these final 3 movies stack up with the rest of the list.
24 hours later.
That was from this movie. It's also the best part of this movie. Oh yeah, I was too lazy to put up the green screen today, so you're just going to have to deal with this background. A civilization living underground wants to take over Earth, so they take control of Jet Jaguar, a robot created by the protagonist, and send Megalon, a giant beetle, to destroy Earth. The protagonists take back control of Jet Jaguar, who is then used to bring Godzilla to Tokyo. Gigan then joins Megalon, Jet Jaguar becomes self-aware and becomes huge, and the battle commences. And I obviously can't show you this battle due to copyright, but... oh boy. This battle is the goofiest battle in any of these movies. Aside from the drop kicks, the monsters dance, Godzilla just starts floating for whatever reason, and guess what? More reused footage! Godzilla and Jaguar win, and the enemies leave for their homes. The story itself really wasn't interesting either, and if I'm being honest, Megalon just kinda sucked. Godzilla and Jaguar just kicked his ass whenever Gigan wasn't there, and in general, he just felt like a less powerful Gigan. This is one of the most hysterically funny movies I've ever seen, but when it isn't being funny, it's just really boring. I'm tempted to put this at the bottom of the list, but if I'm being honest, I got a lot more out of this compared to All Monsters Attack, so this is going right above that. 2 more movies to go. Let's get this over with. These last 2 movies have to do with MechaGodzilla, with the main movie releasing after this one. I don't get it either. Godzilla appears and starts to decimate Tokyo, but when another Godzilla appears, it's revealed the first one is actually MechaGodzilla. Mecha was made by a bunch of shape-shifting space monkeys, go figure again, who are trying to take over the Earth. The monsters both end up injuring each other, and when they battle again, King Caesar joins the battle to help Godzilla. Godzilla then randomly has magnetic powers, and destroys MechaGodzilla by snapping its neck. I really don't have anything else to say about this movie though. I don't know if it's because I just want to get this challenge over with, or if it was just really boring, but this movie did basically nothing for me. It's far from bad, but nothing here grabbed me in any way. It's going right above Gigan for me. Alright, final movie. Let's get this ranking over with Terror of MechaGodzilla. You know, after the quality dip of the past couple of movies, I wasn't expecting anything big to come from this final movie. And then they pulled off one of the best movies of this entire era. This movie not only rectifies the last movie, but also puts equal emphasis on both the characters and the monsters. And in general, it brings together one of the most engaging stories of any Godzilla movie up to this point. They discover a sea dinosaur, Titanosaurus, which is actually being controlled by a scientist working with an alien race. Again, the scientist is working with him because they brought his daughter back to life as a cyborg, who also now controls MechaGodzilla. The main character falls in love with the daughter, but after she almost dies, she pretty much becomes full robot. Titanosaurus and Mecha then fight Godzilla, but once he and the army fight back, Titanosaurus is scared away and Godzilla pretty much beats the shit out of MechaGodzilla. The daughter then shoots herself to kill MechaGodzilla, letting Godzilla win. Pretty deep story here, and it does deliver throughout. The fights were also fun to watch, and it easily had the most emotion out of any of the later movies. Call me crazy, but this is going below the original film. I really enjoyed this movie. Wow. I feel beyond relieved that we ended things on a good note here. But before I give my final thoughts and my final ranking, I need to catch up on some sleep, so I'll see you all tomorrow.
A lot of boring math later.
I fell asleep around 10 p.m. last night, and I woke up at 1 p.m. today. I feel like a changed man. Also, it's storming outside now, so sorry if you hear thunder. Anyway, I spent some time today going over my notes and rewatching a few scenes, and now I have my final rankings for every Godzilla movie in the Shōwa era. So without further ado, let's count them down. All Monsters Attack, Godzilla vs. Megalon, Son of Godzilla, Ebirah, Horror of the Deep, Godzilla vs. Gigan, Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla, King Kong vs. Godzilla, Godzilla Raids Again, Godzilla vs. Hedorah, Destroy All Monsters, Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster, Invasion of Astro-Monster, Terror of MechaGodzilla, the Original Godzilla, and finally, Mothra vs. Godzilla. And if you were paying attention, you'll know the only change that I made was moving Destroy All Monsters up 2 spots. I think I was a little annoyed with how glamorized the monsters were in that movie, but in retrospect, they were seen this way in pretty much every other movie afterward. Plus, the culmination of every single monster together was actually pretty cool to see. So overall, I really enjoyed my experience with these movies. Sure, the consistency was all over the place, but nearly every movie had at least something to offer. I'm leaving this experience with a lot of respect for the Godzilla franchise, and I'm glad I took the time to watch all these movies. That being said, I never want to binge watch movies ever again. I had a good time, don't get me wrong, but cramming all these movies in the past couple of days really took a number on me. But that being said, if you want to see me cover the rest of the Godzilla movies, if they ever become available, let me know in the comments, and tell me your rankings too if you've seen all these movies. So to end things off, I would like to thank you all for watching, and I hope you all enjoyed. Take care.